Are we good to go then? Okay, great. Thank you all. Thank you for your patience. And welcome to the fourth public forum of our new Center for Ethics and Values. And we are delighted to have you all here for our discussion of the ethics of artificial intelligence. I'm Jessica Pfeiffer, and I'm the chair of the philosophy department where the center is housed. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that UMBC was established upon the land of the Piscataway and Susquehannock peoples. Over time, citizens of many more indigenous nations have come to reside in this region, and we humbly offer our respects to all past, present, and future indigenous people connected to this place. And while we recognize the importance of acknowledging those who came before us, we also know that this is a small gesture, and we must also take action toward the necessary work of repair. The mission of the Center for Ethics and Values is to foster thoughtful, informed, and nuanced exploration of pressing ethical issues we face. Ethical issues are everywhere. We face ethical decisions in nearly everything we do, in our work, in our research, as students, as teachers, in our families, in our friendships, in deciding what to eat, in deciding whether to go to a public forum, in deciding where we get our news, or what shows to watch, or what social media to use, in deciding how to vote, and so on. These public forums provide an opportunity for us to come together as a community, including not only the community within UMBC, but also the wider community UMBC serves, to work together to gain a deeper understanding of the serious ethical issues we face. The public forums bring together experts in ethics with those who face those ethical issues. Before we begin, I want to thank all those who made this event possible, and it would not have been possible without our co-sponsors. Many thanks to the Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, also to the Drescher Center for the Humanities, to the Center for Social Science Scholarship, the Department of Computer Science and Electrical Engineering, the Department of Psychology, and the Human Context of Science and Technology program. And a special thanks, as always, to Vanessa Capuano, without whom nothing the center does would be possible. We hope you will also join us for our last event of this year and our events of next year, which are not yet announced. The last event of this year is also part of the Humanities Forum of the Drescher Center for the Humanities. So on Thursday, May 8th, also at 7 p.m., also at this location, we will have our annual Evelyn Barker Memorial Lecture featuring Samuel Scheffler, who will be speaking with us about existential catastrophe and the love of humanity. For more information about this event and to keep up with our events for next year, please visit us at ethics.umbc.edu, follow us on social media, and sign up to receive our newsletter. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Kathy Baxter, who we are delighted to have join us virtually, is the principal architect of ethical AI practice at Salesforce. She develops research-informed best practices to educate Salesforce employees, customers, and the industry on the development of responsible AI. She is a member of Singapore's Advisory Council on the ethical use of AI and data, and AI Verify use of AI and data and AI Verify Foundation on the board of the nonprofit Equal AI and a council member on the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council for Data Equity. It's a mouthful. Previously, she has proudly served as visiting AI fellow at NIST. Prior to Salesforce, she worked at Google, eBay, and Oracle in user experience. She is a co-author of 2 editions of Understanding Your Users, a practical guide to user research methodologies. Gabriella Waters, who's here, is the Director of Operations and Director of the Cognitive and Neurodiversity AI Lab, CoNA, at the Center for Equitable AI and Machine Learning Systems at Morgan State University. She is a research associate at NIST in the AI Innovation Lab, where she leads AI testing, and evaluation across 3 teams, and also serves as the principal AI scientist at the Propel Center, where she is also a professor of culturally relevant AI machine learning systems. Her research focuses on the intersections between human neurobiology and learning, quantifying ethics and equity in AI machine learning systems, neurosymbolic architectures, and intelligent systems that make use of those foundations for improved human-computer synergy. She develops technology innovations with an emphasis on support for neurodiverse populations. David Danks is a professor of data science, philosophy, and policy at the University of California, San Diego, with affiliate appointment in UCSD's computer science and engineering. His research interests are at the intersection of philosophy, cognitive science, and machine learning. He has done significant research in computational cognitive science, and has developed multiple novel causal discovery algorithms for complex types of observational and experimental data. He has explored the ethical, psychological, and policy issues around AI and robotics in transportation, healthcare, privacy, and security. And he has served on multiple advisory boards, including the National AI Advisory Committee. He is a co-editor of the book Building Theories, Heuristics, and Hypotheses in Science, and the author of Unifying the Mind, Cognitive Representations as Graphical Models. And our moderator today is Blake Francis, whose research focuses on moral responsibility and climate change, but also he teaches about the ethics of AI and other technology. He is assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and director of the Human Context of Science and Technology program here at UMBC. And now I'll turn it over to you, Blake.
All right, thanks, Jessica. I'm excited to get the conversation going, and I'm so glad that Kathy is here in her larger-than-life presence, and hopefully we don't have any more technical difficulties going forward. I want to say a little bit about the format of tonight's event. So the plan is that we're going to spend about half the time I'll just have a discussion with the panelists on some prepared questions that sort of guide us into some of the core ethical issues of AI. And then we will open the floor for discussion. And everybody should have a little handout with a QR code. If you don't, we could get you one. And using that QR code, you will get to a Google form that will allow you to enter in a question for discussion. And then our moderators for the discussion will select the question. So that's how we're going to go. So I want to start us off with a simple question so that we're all on the same page. So all of you work with artificial intelligence in different dimensions in the context of industry, science and research, philosophy, ethics, computer science. And so what is artificial intelligence?
Depends
None of us
on
want to
who you
take
ask.
that one. We're all just like, boy, I don't want that one. You want me to take a shot at it?
I'm sure you will take a good shot.
All right. We make a joke there, but that's actually part of the point, right? What counts as AI has changed historically, both how we do it and even what we think of as the point of AI. So in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, even into part of the 90s, the goal of AI was to have machine systems, computational systems, that could think the way we think. So you have Herb Simon and Owl Newell trying to build a chess-playing system by studying what grandmasters do and seeing, could we find a way to have a chess system, a computational system, that does what those humans were doing? Or we have folks like Pat Langley trying to build automated scientific discovery engines by studying what it is that human scientists are doing. There was a big change that happened in the 90s, though. Starting in the mid to late 1990s, there was a big shift in AI that said, let's not try and have systems that capture what human intelligence is writ large, and let's not even try to have systems that solve problems the way humans do. Instead, let's have systems that can learn from data and that can find new ways of solving problems. So we saw a shift towards what we think of as narrow AI, which was, all right, I'm going to give you a bunch of images, and I want you to tell me which ones indicate a cancerous lesion and which ones don't. Or I'm going to give you data on a whole bunch of my students. Please tell me which of these students are likely to succeed and which are at risk of failing my class, so I can give extra support to those who are at risk. These kinds of things where we sort of narrow it down, we know what counts as success, we know how to solve, we don't know how to solve the problem, but we know what, we would recognize a solution if it came to us, and then just throw huge amounts of data and compute it. And this is really what happened for about 25 years of AI, from the mid-90s up until the 2020s. AI became this way of not actually trying to have artificial intelligence, but have artificial capabilities, very specific things that we wanted a system to do in place of us. As we all know, things have changed in the last 5 years. The last 5 years, we've seen the rise of foundational and generative AI systems that now are getting back to a bit more of this model of having systems that are more general purpose, that the cognitive labor that we do, they are capable of doing some approximation to it. Just as we think of machines in a factory duplicating or capturing or replacing our physical labor, right? So the idea is, what are the things that we do that require solving problems, that require adapting to new contexts, that require thinking broadly across different challenges? And let's see if whether through some combination of data, intelligence, ideas about how to build the system, baking in our expert knowledge, let's try and get systems that can do and think about the world in ways like we do. And we're seeing these systems now start to not only exist on our phones and our computers, but in the form of AI agents, which I think we're hopefully going to get to talk about later in this session. Systems that are able to actually intervene on the world and take action in the world without even a human being there. So we're starting to get true artificial agents, even if they're not necessarily to human levels of intelligence.
And I think it's also important that ethically, I emphasize that we are still with artificial narrow intelligence. Despite a lot of the hype around being millimeters away or micrometers away from AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, we're not there. And artificial general intelligence isn't measured by how much profit an agent can generate. It's measured by specific capabilities of a model that we're just not achieving at this time. So I always want to tamp down some of the hype that goes along with that. And if you're using your QR code to ask me if I'm building the Terminator, not today.
Can you say a little bit more about the definition of AGI?
So that's going to differ depending on who you speak to as well. Classically, the definition of AGI has to do with systems that are at human level capacity in terms of cognition. I'm not going to say reasoning because we make cognitive models in the architecture when we are building these systems. So I want to juxtapose this into something we all can probably recognize. A lot of people think that we are really close to AGI. I want you to ask a model to draw a recipe and see what you get out of it. I want you to ask a model to tell you the difference between a blueberry muffin and a chihuahua's face. And you will see that we are not there yet. And so this human likeness, so the approximation of the human capability for cognition, is what AGI is based on. ASI, which is artificial superintelligence, goes beyond that. That's the Terminator. And so when we think of superintelligent, it has far surpassed human capabilities, and it is able to act on its own accord outside of its programming. And so these are distinctions that need to be made really clear, because there's a lot of fear around the implementation of a lot of this technology. And the first thought is it's going to take us over, and we're going to be at the will of the machines. And I'm almost saying you already are, because I haven't seen most people's eyes in the last 5 years, because everyone walks around like this. So that is a far off possibility, but we're nowhere near there.
Do you have anything you'd like to add to the question of what is AI, Kathy?
My colleagues covered it well.
All right, excellent. So the next question, we're starting off with some on-the-nose questions here, just to keep it nice and broad. What is AI ethics? And I want to invite you to consider whether AI ethics has to do with, say, the ethics of the people who use AI, or whether there's something sort of implicitly value-laden about these technologies and the way that we use them in our society. And maybe as a prompt also, like especially in the research context, where did the ethical issues come up as you're using AI in doing research?
So we have a different positioning as researchers because we're subject to an IRB. So ethics are baked into our entire approach to how we conduct projects. And so we are a little different than industry. But I always ask the question, whose ethics? Like, my lab has a certain ethical statement. Everyone's department has a certain ethical positioning. And I'm always a little nervous about the ethics conversation because it starts to creep really close to the alignment discussion. And I am always not in favor of trying to align AI with human values. I am more concerned about the actual governance and the things that we can actually hold to a certain accord and to a certain standard. And the challenge is that, and you're speaking to a theoretical researcher, so I'm really responsible for this, but there is no standardization in how you develop AI. Everyone can go at it in whatever way they would like. And so when you do that, ethically, you need some sort of threshold for which you say, okay, this is the floor for where we want these models to behave in certain ways. And then you build from there, and there's room for individuality and innovation. But we haven't established the floor, the threshold. And so what's happening is it's only an ethical issue once it surfaces. There's no movement to tamp down on a thing that could be considered an ethical violation. So most people would say, okay, yeah, baseline, don't harm humans. But AI are being used in combat. We are violating that as an ethical issue. And so we don't have an agreed upon floor where everyone's like, okay, in every circumstance, we will not violate this. And that's where the conversation kind of needs to start, because there are all these tensions and misalignments that we haven't had a serious discussion about. We just have an implied thought of course, that's ethically incorrect. You know, you wouldn't ever violate that. Well, unless. And so we need to do a better job of making a concerted effort to do that. Like efforts like what David does with the National AI Council, or committee rather, could do some of that. The work that we do, I see Dr. Finan here with the Maryland Responsible AI Council can start to make inroads with that. But we have to collectively come together and say, okay, look, no exceptions. You can't let your EV run over people. Like, that should be a no exceptions thing. But legally, it's like, it's a user error, so it's not my fault. And we need to do a better job of actually intentionally putting something to paper.
I think one of the things that Gabriella said that I want to pick up on is this idea that the ethics is really pervasive. And so if you think of ethics as how do we have some principles that we're going to trot out and impose or something, excuse me, that's not actually going to work out very well. So the way that, for example, I frame it to my students is I say, you know, when you're building an AI system, and I agree we don't have, you know, best practices for every step of the AI lifecycle, but we do have an idea of, you know, you've got to have an idea of what you're trying to solve, you start to design, you think about the constraints, you get your data, you build your model. At every time you think to yourself, well, I could do it this way or I could do it that way. The math and computer and the CS, they're not compelling me to do it in a particular way. That's a place that ethics has come in. And the reason that that's a place that ethics has come into the picture is because those are the moments where you're deciding which values am I going to prioritize? Whose interests and needs am I going to prioritize? Am I going to build a system that's better for the professor or better for the students? I can do it either way. Or if I'm doing the self-driving car, I can build a self-driving car that always follows the law. I can build a self-driving car that minimizes the chance of an accident. I actually can't build a car that does both of those things simultaneously. Because sometimes, I'm not advocating breaking the law, but sometimes the best way we know to minimize the probability of an accident is to drive the speed of prevailing traffic. I live in Southern California. I will tell you on the freeways, if you're not stopped in a traffic jam, the prevailing speed of traffic is often significantly above the speed limit. So if I've got a self-driving car, what do I do? Right? Now, if I'm a roboticist building a self-driving car, I work for Waymo or somebody like that, the technology doesn't care. I mean, I can build it to always follow the speed limit. I can build it to drive as fast as the traffic around it. From a technical perspective, there's absolutely it's not like one's harder than the other. They're both easy to do. They're both hard to do, but they're both the same level of hard to do. That's an ethical choice now. And so I think one of the things with AI ethics that many of us have moved towards, and I'm really excited to hear Kathy's response to this as somebody who's doing this in industry, is emphasizing the ways in which AI ethics is already happening. Like, if I build any AI system, I'm already making hundreds of ethical choices. We're just doing it without thinking very hard about it, historically, and even now. So a lot of it, I think, is how do we surface the choices that we're making, understand the implications of the choices we're making, and give, whether students or colleagues in industry or ourselves when we're building these systems, give the tools to make better decisions, recognizing that better is a very vague and fuzzy word there. But Kathy, I don't know if any of this resonates to somebody in the industry.
It does, and it's tough following you because y'all are both, you really nailed this. I would add +1 on to everything that you've said. AI is always laden with the values of the humans that create it. Is there an echo, by the way?
Not
Does
on our
the
end.
audio sound okay?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fine.
it's okay.
Okay, great. It's AI ethics is both about how AI is used as well as how it's built, because AI is not neutral. From the moment that we humans have decided that we want to solve a problem, how we collect and label data, which metrics we optimize for, how we define success, human values are embedded at every step along the way. And so the people who build the AI, it's their values that end up getting represented. So AI ethics isn't just about responsible use by end users. It's also about the entire life cycle, from design to deployment to ongoing use. It's about recognizing that every model reflects choices, and those choices have consequences. And so, speaking of industry, at Salesforce, our Office of Ethical and Humane Use was actually created to explicitly address this challenge. Our work is grounded in the belief that technology, especially something as powerful as AI, must be guided by human values from the start, but by understanding everyone's values and being explicit and transparent about them. And so that's why in our work, we focus not just on guardrails, but on building responsible frameworks that embed explicit choices into the product decisions, the policies, our governance structures. And then as we enter this new era of agentic AI, we're asking harder questions than ever. So what values are being automated? Who benefits? Who's at risks? How do we ensure that the systems we build support equity, dignity, and human agency, and not just efficiency or profit?
And in addition to that, also how the ethical landscapes change and shift, because what we considered to be ethical 50 years ago is a horror story today. And there needs to be that adaptability that as society changes, that these tools can reflect the ethics that are in place at that time. So they can't be so rigid. Just like when you're building a model, you're making trade-offs all along the way for performance and capabilities and impacts. You're going to have to face that same challenge when you start to think about ethics. What are the trade-offs for going with the prevailing speed of traffic versus forcing the car to go at the speed limit? And are they worth it?
And then all of the cultural differences, you know, we are building our models in the US on US standard English. And what do these models, what do these AI systems look like when they are used in Japan or Singapore or Kenya or Germany? Like, these things matter. And, you know, for something like a toxicity detector, words that are toxic in US standard English, if you just simply did a translation, they make no sense in Japanese. And if you tried to do a literal translation of racial slurs or other toxic language in Japanese into English, it's also not going to make any sense. So everything needs to be culturally situated, and it absolutely changes over time.
We have a whole field for this. It's called cross-language information retrieval. And it works really well for research papers and not much else.
Interesting.
The way I always say it whenever students ask, well, why don't we have machine translation? I'm like, we do. We have fabulous machine translation if what you want to do is translate the literal meaning of the words. Now think about your own language. How often is what you're saying conveyed entirely and solely by the literal meaning of the words that you've put forward? Look what I just did, right? Obviously by posing it as a question to you that I assume we all know the answer to, right? I've done a certain kind of communication without even saying it. And so, yeah, it doesn't, it works for this very narrow task. But I think what all of this raises is an enormous, not only ethical, but social and political, in the small p, political sense, a challenge, which is, you know, if we're going to build systems, yes, it's lovely if you can personalize systems to some degree, but we can't have infinitely personalizable systems. We're not going to all have our own little AI that is tuned exactly to what we want, or if we do, it's a long ways off. There's startups trying to do it, but they're not there yet. And so I think we also have this challenge of, you know, if we want to do things like certification of an AI, or we want to be able to have some testing of an AI system, how do we think about the context and the, you know, standards of performance that we're going to expect when we know it's going to get deployed in all of these different places and environments? I think that's something that a lot of people are working on. I'm not suggesting this is not some new idea that no one's ever thought of. But I think it's important that we sort of realize there are all of these pressures to diversify our AI and have it be as individualized as possible, but there also are real risks and challenges there as well that we're having to wrestle with.
And what you just described was literally the project I was on at NIST. That was the TEV I was leading, was how do you test, evaluate, validate, verify AI models across different contexts. And we ended up with using people. I know, right? Actual people. And using the general public to interact with these models and see what happens. I'm like, oh, I have to explain to developers that you need real humans. You can't just have agents testing other agents. You actually need to talk to people, because Bob Earl is going to use your LLM to figure out how to get grease from under his fingernails and back into the engine. And you didn't think that someone was going to ask a question like that. But until you actually challenge the model under real world conditions with real world use, you're never going to be able to surface all of these different possibilities. And so that's why in that process, I created what is known, what might be still known, we don't know if it's gone yet, the Contextual Robustness Index, so that you can measure the AI's performance against all of these different areas for how they show up. Do they present accessibility challenges? Do they create risks? Risks is not a negative word. There's a risk of a benefit emerging. There's a risk of a harm emerging. What does that look like? All of these ways of evaluating it. So we need to lean into that work a bit more, but we actually need to do it in the real world. It can't be in silica, in this idea of a sandbox. You actually have to get real people in there. And my computer science side Here's my colleague screaming down the hallway, people are messy though. And my social scientist side screaming down the hallway, they don't know how to people.
This is a perfect time for me to jump in and ask a question that some people in the audience might be asking, because I feel like this is a fairly new technology. But what exactly is an AI agent? And I think, Kathy, this might be a good one to direct to you. Explain to us what an AI agent is. What is this technology?
Yes, so a lot of people think that it's just a chat bot, but AI agents are actually taking actions on your behalf. They are automating decisions on your behalf, and so this really is the next wave of AI. And so at Salesforce, when we are designing generative and agentic AI, we adhere to a set of responsible guidelines. So it must be accurate, safe from toxicity and other harmful outputs or actions. It needs to be transparent that it is an AI that is taking these actions. This isn't a human behind the wheel doing these things. It has to be accessible to everyone. And, we've seen AI is not always accessible. It needs to empower human abilities, and it needs to be sustainable. And so last year we launched Agent Force. And so Salesforce is really focused on creating tools that allow people to lean in on the highest risk, highest judgment decisions, and then delegate the rest. Remove the decisions, remove the actions that are rote, that are not high risk. So I'll give you a couple of examples, because I think, again, until you think about some of the examples, it can be hard to really imagine how it's used. But in an enterprise use case, one of our customers is 1-800 accountant. And they use Agent Force to support customer support inquiries. Now, right now, tax season is upon us, and it can be really stressful. It's stressful for individuals. It's stressful for small businesses in particular. And so, like a lot of tax companies, 1-800 Accountant sees a surge in customer inquiries during this time. And many of those are actually pretty straightforward questions that can be answered, or with very minor actions that can be taken. And so because Agent Force is trained, it's grounded in the customer's trusted internal and external data, guidebooks, data from the IRS and other validated sources. It can help customers 24/7. And those customers don't have to wait on hold to talk to somebody. They don't have to go digging through the irs.gov and try to figure out an answer. And so 1-800 Accountants has found that 50% of their cases now are being handled by Agent Force, which is really amazing, because that shortens the wait time for customers and frees up the human agents to then be able to handle the more difficult actions and things, or to work on strategic initiatives. And I'll give you just one more example very quickly. There's a company called Prasina, which transforms healthcare for patients with type 2 diabetes. Not sure if anybody in the audience has type 2 diabetes, but this company provides daily personalized support, and they target lifestyle factors and habits so that they can improve outcomes faster. Agent Force is enabling those providers to focus on the high impact interventions, engagements with their patients. And so it allows more efficient engagement and delivering more personalized care.
I think one thing that Kathy really highlighted there in general about agents is the ways in which when they're done right, they have the ability to let us humans focus on the cool, interesting, hard, challenging problems. The idea that I could say, oh, geez, I've got to remember to make, I don't know, these restaurant reservations when this colleague is coming into town, but I don't want to mess with it. If I could just quickly type into a prompt, find a restaurant in this zip code with this kind of food for 4 people at between 6:30 and 8 p.m. You can think of it as sort of a super complicated search query that I'm not going to sit down and want to do that. It's going to take me half an hour to look at all the restaurant websites. But if I could just have an agent that runs out and does it, that would be awesome, because that's not interesting. Figuring out what to order, that's something I want to say for myself, right? That's something that I don't want to delegate to an agent. That's an interesting problem. Or for any professors in the audience or teachers in the audience, grade. You could think about this as if I could have an AI grade the multiple choice parts, that would be great. And in fact, you can. But I don't want them grading necessarily the hard essays, because that's where I need to be able to really think through the complexities of things. I will say agents also, though, create certain kinds of risks. What we think are simple tasks often are not. They seem simple to us humans because we are very smart in certain ways. And so I think we have to be a little careful that we don't unintentionally delegate tasks that are actually complicated, right? Figuring out whether, if I'm trying to figure out whether somebody else is in a certain kind of emotional distress, that seems like an easy task to many humans because of the ways that we are evolved and develop over time. It's actually really hard to do from an AI perspective, right? So that's an example of something. There's also risks when you have too many of these systems, right? So imagine that to go back to the restaurant example, it sounds silly, but imagine I said, my wife and I might like to go out to dinner, but we never quite know until that day whether we're going to want to. So every day, just make us 10 restaurant reservations for the following day. Actually, do it a week out, right? Just make 10 reservations a week out, and we'll decide on that day, and if we don't want to go, we'll just cancel them, because, you don't get charged for it. Now, I would be a jerk if I did that. Right? I'm violating the social contract. But it's not actually that big of a deal, right? Yeah, the restaurants are occasionally, having me flake out. But I'm in San Diego. There's a lot of restaurants in San Diego, right? So it's not going to be that big a hit. Now imagine 10,000 people do that. So you have 100,000 reservations a day getting canceled, the vast majority of them. Or even just 100 people doing that. So you've got 1,000 restaurant reservations a day getting canceled. That's a problem. Every individual is doing something that seems perfectly sensible and rational to them. But the ways in which agents can actually magnify and expand what we can achieve comes with a risk. In this case, a sort of tragedy of the commons. We're all doing what's best for us, but we end up having a huge problem collectively. So I think there's a lot of things we're going to have to work through as agents are really growing. They've got a lot of potential, but create new challenges.
So one follow-up question that I have about this is, how do we develop trust with these agents? How do I know that I can trust the agent to, in the case of the restaurants, only reserve dinner reservations at places I like to eat? But even more complicated than that, what if my agent is quote unquote acting on me for me in a way that's ethically relevant? Maybe these are doctor's appointments that I'm using up. Maybe there's some other social good that this agent is acting for me to get. How do I know I can trust the agent, and how do I know that the agent is going to act in a way that is morally aligned? I don't know if that's the right use of that word, but morally aligned with my own values.
So that's interesting. And as David and Kathy were speaking, my whole position on this is the level of risk. If you're deploying these agents in low-risk situations, the impact is not as severe as if you were employing them in healthcare. And so we are not at a place where we have a rating. Like when I'm building agents that rely on generative AI, I build in a confidence rating so that the agent can start to say, I don't really know, instead of just taking full scale whatever comes out of the generative AI model. But that's not a standard practice. And we don't have a scale for interpreting the level of trustworthiness of agentic AI at this time. It's very, very new. And so these are the kinds of questions we need to think about in terms of ethics on how do we start to evaluate on that. I know how I would go about evaluating. I know how I go about building it. But I'm one person out of millions of developers, and I'm not representative of any sample. We're all an island. It's like, for the biology majors, it's the number of atoms on the tip of my finger. We're all doing our own little thing. And it's very difficult for you to say, well, I'm going to point to atom number 4,742,000,000, blah, 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 and say, I trust that one. So we need to figure out the standards for how you get there. We're leaping forward before we've really parsed the foundations in terms of that. And so that is something we need to do, that work here, because everything comes from that foundation and it grows out. So now is that point of inflection where we really need to have that serious conversation about what that looks like.
And there's not going to be, there's no magic potion here, right? I mean, if I think about why do I trust my doctor? Well, it's a mix of reasons. My doctor is licensed. I know that they went through a lot of medical school and passed certain tests. I've got experience with them. I've interacted with them. They can explain their decisions to me, kind of, sort of. Doctors are, no offense to the doctors in the audience, but they're not actually as good as they think at explaining why they made the diagnosis they did. But that's okay. They can sort of get at it, right? So it's all of these different kinds of things. And the same is going to be true of agents. We're going to start to trust them because we interact with them and they give us the right kinds of, they seem to consistently do the right thing. And we're going to need to have some kind of, whether we call it licensing or certification or best practices, maybe coming from companies like Salesforce or Microsoft or others, that we can say, okay, this was built in the right way. This has probably been tested in the right sorts of ways. It's going to be, can the systems explain why they made mistakes, if they do make mistakes? Or can they tell us something about, and actually tell us the reason for the actions, as opposed to just sort of making up a story that we'd like to hear? So I think it's going to be a whole mix of things, but you're right to call that out, because when a system is going off and doing things without my oversight, without my direct oversight, absolutely, we're going to have to be able to trust that what I wanted is what it's doing.
You have anything?
Yeah, this is where AI literacy comes in, and people need to know how to interrogate these systems. So ask it to cite its sources, and then actually click on and look at those sources where it pulled the information from. There's something called chain of thought prompting, where you ask a model or you ask an AI system to explain why it gave the answer it did, why it did the thing that it did. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it makes it up. But again, like being able to interrogate the system, seeing an audit trail. Let me look at all of the things, all of the actions that you took in the last 24 hours, the last 10 days. Do those seem like reasonable actions? Are those the actions you would have taken? So we need a level of transparency, a level of auditing. We need some certifications, like if it's medical related, that agent needs to have HIPAA compliance. If it's government, it needs to be FedRAMP. If it's financial, it needs to have SOC compliance, whatever it is. So there's a number of things, as David pointed out. We need all of the above.
They really are like 2-year-olds, in that if everything seems fine, they've dumped something out and they're playing in it. So you need to check in with them. Like, you wouldn't leave a 2-year-old alone for a month at a time and then check in, right? You check in on them frequently, and you have to do that, because unlike the example that David is giving with the physician, you don't get a second opinion with an agentic AI. There is no malpractice insurance for the agentic AI. So you have to be very discerning. You cannot, there are edges to this technology, very hard edges. No matter what industry and developers like to promise, they cannot do all the things. It's not this omnipresent panacea of technology. You have to constantly be vigilant because it can make mistakes. They do make mistakes. Confabulations exist for a reason. And when you're dealing with these non-deterministic systems, non-deterministic, we all know? I still have 4 hands. So non-deterministic systems are those that don't follow rules. They are stochastic, they're probabilistic, meaning that you can get something slightly different every time. It's a roll of the dice every single time you get an output, which is why we see hallucinations / confabulations in generative AI. And as we build agentic models, they are built on that non-deterministic sort of platform, in that they are making decisions based on the probability that these are the correct ones, that the output that they're going to generate is the one that is optimal for your particular query. And so with that in mind, if I were a physician and you came in and you said, hi, oh, I need to talk to you about blah, blah, blah. I saw that you sent me a prescription. And I said, hello. And I rolled a dice. How? And I rolled a dice. R, and I rolled the dice every time I said a word. You would not trust me. You would call the police. But this is what's happening with these non-deterministic models. And we're just like, isn't it cool? It spoke in English. Magic, you know? It's absurd to us to expect a human to behave in that way, but these models are doing that just very quickly in the background. And because that process is invisible to us, we think that they're a lot more intelligent than they are. But if you think about the dice roll, then it's no wonder that we see hallucinations or confabulations. It's a miracle that we see fact. And that's the part we have to start to flip when we start to think about these things.
I think we should probably turn it over to audience questions to make sure we have enough time. So I think we have Professor Nance and Professor Pfeiffer. Thanks.
I can scream really well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't know if everyone can hear you.
You might
And
need
Kathy
to-
may not be able to hear you, so.
You might need the mic.
The mic needs
Could
So
somebody
I
turn
feel like I
on
have to
the-
translate. I have to do the Disney people voice.
There's
There's
an on button.
Oh
an
my
on.
goodness.
It is the user.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've gotten a number of questions about the impact of AI outside of AI. And here, a lot of the questions are about how AI will affect humans, affect human creativity, affect humans' credit for creative works, create anti-intellectualism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so that it could have an impact on how we are as humans and how we get along, not just, outside of the AI itself.
I think part of the challenge is that there are some really difficult conversations that need to happen about what matters to us as humans. What are the things we really care about as humans? And that's not an easy conversation to have. I mean, as a simple example, I don't think being able to spell well is intrinsic to who I am as a human. So I'm okay with having a spell checker. But I do think that making real emotional and intellectual connections with my students is that's part of being a human, is actually connecting with other people. And so I don't want an AI to mediate my teaching in that way. That would be the AI trying to take over something that I think is a deeply important, at least to me, part of what it is to be human. Right now, I think a lot of the uses of AI are happening out of convenience. It's not that we've sat down and said, you know what? I'm perfectly good if I'm not quite as good of a speller later. I'm okay with losing that skill. I'm okay with losing the ability to drive a manual transmission car. Like,
I'm not okay with it.
I'm lazier than you. But I think what AI what AI should force us to do, but I fear it has not, is actually having these serious conversations about what is it that really matters to us individually and collectively in our human experience, in our shared experience of humanity. There's what is the thing, I always wanted AI to take care of cooking and doing my laundry so I could paint and write music, not have it paint and write music so I could do, cooking and the laundry. And I think that there's something to that idea that we're building AI systems and then just sort of tossing them out and replacing things without thinking about whether we actually wanted that. And here, I think one of the challenges is the feeling of disempowerment that so many people feel right now when it comes to AI. They think AI is this thing that is happening to us. But of course, AI is created by people. I mean, we're not yet at the point that AI is creating its own AI autonomously in any meaningful sense.
Give me a minute.
Well, yeah, you're trying to build Skynet, so I think what these questions raise, whether it's about art, whether it's about other kinds of creativity, whether it's about human connection, right? Do we want AI therapists? There's a question that actually, empirically, there are communities, there are populations that AI therapists seem to do better than human therapists. So should we use it for them because all we care about are the outcomes? Do we think that there are other aspects of therapy that are important in terms of human connection? We have to talk about these things. We have to have the difficult conversations and then find ways to have our voices be heard at the companies building these technologies or at the people down the road who have some power of regulation and governance and these kinds of things. It is not easy to have these conversations. They're not always pleasant. To think about, well, which parts of my life would I be willing to give up? But I don't think there's a substitute for that. Unfortunately, sometimes I have to actually wrestle with problems. Otherwise, we're going to sort of just, in a somewhat lazy way, as I have with an automatic transmission, just slump into de-skilling and losing things that really matter.
You don't miss going into fourth?
Have you seen Southern California traffic jams?
You just hang out
You don't
first.
get to fourth.
That's true. I think part of this is also that we are struggling with challenges in the digital that we haven't solved in the analog. And so, I heard that. I understand human nature. Like, we want the availability heuristic. Like, give me the path of least resistance. But at the same time, I know we have challenges. One of our keynote speakers at the symposium this weekend put a photo of himself and another physician. And he said, you're looking at all of the neurologists in Zimbabwe. Then he put up a statistic that there are 10 neurologists in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That means there are 10 million plus people for every neurologist. And so he's leveraging the tech to step in to help get services to people who can't get them because there are only 10 physicians. There are only 2 in the photo, and he's from Oxford. So that means there's 1 neurologist in all of Zimbabwe. And so that's an analog problem. And we're forcing tech into the equation because there are no people to fill in. Why are there no people to fill in? That's the question. So I think what AI is doing for us is actually a service. It's forcing us to look at the challenges that we have kind of pushed aside. And now that a lot of things are being offloaded to the digital, we're having to go, well, why would you go there? Like, why is that the place to go? Well, because there's only 1 neurologist in Zimbabwe. Okay, why is there only 1 neurologist? And so I think that this is a moment where we're at a point at humanity where we have to, as David said, really look at what we want as a civilization, but then also all the value systems that allowed these other things to persist so that there's a need for the model to step in. And in terms of even just in education, it's every time I speak at a university, every student is going to know immediately what the question is that the professors usually ask me. How do I make sure students don't cheat with AI? And my question is, how do you make sure students value knowledge instead of grades? So it's,
How do you? Please tell me.
but that's like the foundation of how our education system works. Like, I only need the grade. So if the grade is the only thing that matters, the shortest distance between you and that grade is the path that you're going to take. And so we have a lot of things in analog that are amplified by the digital. And we're struggling to perfect the digital based on the flaws of the analog instead of addressing the analog.
And there's this massive risk of what sometimes is called normalizing the abnormal. I was talking to a former student who went to work for an educational technology company on the tech side, but he was sent out on a sales call. And he was on the sales call, talking to the superintendent of a school district in a relatively rural area. And the superintendent was, listening and goes, "Oh, this is great. This is so wonderful. Now it'll be okay that we only have one teacher for every 50 students." And that's the normalizing the abnormal, right? That's the one that says, "Oh, we don't need more neurologists in Zimbabwe. We've got AI." And I think, how do we, I think there's a real social and political challenge to not continuing down that path.
Right.
Kathy, did you want to add?
I would say like our role for many of us is a very privileged one. We have a choice as to whether or not we want to use AI to generate images or to help us write a report. People in Zimbabwe don't have that choice. Either I get an agent that does this for me, or I don't get medical attention. So those of us that are in a position of privilege to have a choice for what are the tools that we choose to engage with, what do we decide that we're willing to normalize? Where do we go to work? Who do we give our data to in terms of companies? All of those are choices, and they can feel like a drop in the ocean. The fact that I didn't let my daughter have any of Meta, WhatsApp, Instagram, didn't let her create a TikTok account. Once she turned 18, she got access to all of those. But as long as I had influence, I was not going to allow Zuck to have her data. I was not going to put her in a situation where she was going to get cyberbullied or presented tons and tons of anorexia and cutting videos. I'm privileged enough to be able to be in that position. And so that might just be one person's data, well, my data too, because I also don't use them, but they add up. And having these kinds of conversations with others about the choices we choose to make. Why did it have to be so hard for me and for my daughter to choose not to have Facebook or Instagram? The school put all of they had a Facebook page. That's where all of the sports went. That's where all of the school plays and everything. And when there was an update, my daughter doesn't get that update. Like, that's not okay. So being proactive in schools, when my daughter got inaccurately busted for using ChatGPT to write a report, you better believe I was in that office and I was explaining how AI detectors work or don't.
Or don't.
Yeah, or don't, which is more accurate. So if you're in a position of privilege to choose how your data are used, who you go to work for, what tools you choose to engage with, use that privilege because not everyone has it.
Dr. Nance?
Yeah. Hello?
Yep.
Is it coming through? Yeah?
It is.
Okay, great. There's lots of good questions here. There's several questions on the environmental impact of AI, which is not something that we've touched on yet. So I was wondering, if you all could speak a little bit about the environmental costs and maybe potentially environmental benefits. I don't know. I mean, one person proposed in the question, could we also use AI to solve environmental problems aside from the fact that creating AI creates environmental problems? So I was wondering if you all could speak a little more about that.
Like yes and yes.
Yeah.
You can use AI to do the logistics of how you would challenge what's the current paradigm, but it's also in how we build the AI right now. And so there are things, the techniques that can minimize some of that impact, like transfer learning, like federated learning, like using small data instead of big data. It requires thoughtfulness though, you know. In the United States, we like to do everything by brute force. I'm the biggest, baddest data guy you ever saw. And we just throw as much resources at a thing that we can, and then we see what sticks. But we already know the enormous cost in terms of energy, in terms of water. Last year, one of the cities here on the northeast coast actually ran out of water because it was being used to cool the data centers that had been built there. And so industry is saying, well, we can just put the data center technically underwater. And I'm like, so then you're gonna heat the water. You all didn't go to science class, did you? So, you know, you have to start thinking very intentionally, and you have to think interdisciplinarily, clearly, because they don't talk to the scientists, and try to come up with these solutions together as a unit. And if I can just impress upon everyone here going forward, AI doesn't care what your major is or what your borders are. So we need voices from the different majors and the different borders in the room before the thing is deployed. At every part of the development life cycle, there needs to be a variety of people weighing in. I cannot tell you how exhausted I am with developers who develop like healthcare AI coming to me asking me to help them redress all these challenges. And I'm like, well, where's your social worker or your nurse or your physician that you worked with? And they're looking at me like, what are you talking about, Willis? And I'm like, you're building a healthcare AI and you don't have healthcare expertise. What did you think was going to happen? Like, money? So I just need us to also feel very confident being parts of those teams and giving that insight. The environment can be visualized in a lot of ways. I can build you a digital twin of the rainforest, and we can see what would happen real time if you make certain changes or you do certain things. I can build you an agent that will predict out, you know, emissions and all of that if we continue our current course. We have that. We're looking at that. But the reality is, we have to change our value proposition from how quickly can we extract to how quickly we can enrich. And that is at odds with our current system of business and industry. But it's a thing that we can do. We are capable. But we have to be the market that demands that. So we have to buy things and use things that incorporate those kinds of philosophies. We have to support that work, and we have to constantly go after it. And it's an intentional choice we all have to make as consumers, as researchers, as parts of industry, so that we can do a better job. We are running out of time very quickly.
David or Kathy, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to say at Salesforce, we really focus on what we call right-sized models. We're not trying to create the biggest model out there. We're trying to create narrow AI. One of the phrases you might have heard David use in the very beginning. So really focused. We're not trying to be the best at all things. We're trying to write the best sales email, or create a model that does the best at summarizing a customer support case and then turning that into a knowledge article. We also, at the Paris AI Safety Institute Summit, or the Action Summit that they had a couple of months ago, we, in collaboration with Hugging Face, created the AI Energy Score. And so that is a standardized score across models, across AI, for how do you measure the energy used. Sounds like a really simple concept, kind of surprising that it didn't exist already, but that was launched. We're also one of the first members of the UN's Coalition for Sustainable AI. So there's a lot of things that companies can do to be very mindful in the resources that they use. But I think there's also a role for people to play. So I think about every time I go to ChatGPT and ask it to generate something for me, I imagine myself pouring an 8-ounce bottle of water on the ground, because it takes about 1 bottle of water for ChatGPT to generate a 100-word email. Some of you probably remember, maybe they still exist in hotels. In the bathroom, there's a little sign, there's a little thing that will say, reusing your towels saves X gallons of water. Imagine if you were told every time you generated an image or something on your favorite AI generator, how much energy and water you just used. I think people would perhaps be more mindful in how often they're using it.
I mean, I think I'll just note, companies already are, especially as we are entering more turbulent financial times, which are impacting tech companies along with everyone else. We are already seeing companies over the last 6 months pulling back and saying, all right, we need to be more efficient. And how do we, as Kathy was saying, right size our models? And how do we, even if that means you're taking a tiny performance hit, people won't really notice. Or how do we acquire that company that's building personal language models instead of large language models, and these kinds of things. So I think, companies are often the ones bearing the costs. Some of the costs are things that get externalized, but a lot of them are internalized at the companies, and they're responding as well. So it won't solve it, but it makes a difference.
Dr. Pfeiffer?
Yeah, so we have a number of questions about how will it affect jobs going forward, and what should we, how will automation affect jobs? How will AI affect jobs? What should students be doing to try to, so to speak, AI-proof their future? Et cetera.
So there have been a lot of analyses of what's going to be the impact on different job categories. To the best of my knowledge, somebody may correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've read a lot of these. None of them have yet found a job that can be entirely done by AI. There might be tasks within a job that can be done by AI, but nobody's yet found something that can be entirely done by AI. So one thing to recognize is that AI isn't going to just eliminate entirely job categories. What it's going to do is change the nature of the work. So, as the saying sometimes goes, you're probably not going to lose your job to an AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who knows how to use an AI. And so one thing to say to students is start to understand what these systems can and cannot do. Right? Understand what they're able to do for you, and what you're just no, I'm not going to use it for this. Spell check is really good at the word, clandestine, that I always seem to misspell. It's really bad if you're trying to get there versus there versus there, right? Spell check is terrible for that. Don't try and use it for those kinds of things. And so that kind of understanding that we all have, we have to build those muscles when it comes to AI, to understand what it can and can't do for us in many cases. You're not going to be able to, I think thinking about it in terms of AI proofing your career is the wrong way to think about it, because AI is going to be here. It's not, You're not going to be able to avoid encountering it. You probably already are encountering it all the time, just on Zoom when it does its little AI companion and sends you a summary of the meeting you just had, most of which are very bad. But you're not going to be able to avoid it. So I don't think you should think about it in terms of AI proofing. I think it's thinking about what are the things that AI can't do very well that we might need the human for, but also what are the things that we think humans are particularly good at. So people are good at coming up with new solutions to old problems. People are good at interpersonal communication and working with others. People are good at learning new things, learning brand new ideas. So making sure you are curious, that you can think critically, that you can examine evidence and come up with arguments. And the philosophy department chair is sitting over there going, yes, yes, that's what you should do. You should all be philosophy majors. Yeah, you should all be philosophy. I'm a little biased there. But it is the case that I think, if you're a computer science student, you shouldn't be thinking, look, AI is going to be able to write modules of code better and faster than you can. It already can. For modules of code, if you know exactly what you want the code to do. What AI is bad at still to this day, and probably will be bad at for a while, is architecture. What are the modules I need? What am I even trying to solve? How do I take this vague notion of student success and turn it into something precise that I could build an AI to do anything with, right? All of these kinds of things are the things that I think humans are going to still be needed for a really long time. It's the sort of mundane, simple, we know exactly what counts as success stuff. That's going to get shifted over to AI. So don't have that be your focus.
Anything that can be measured by a KPI, an AI will do well. It's all the other stuff that's not in a KPI. So
What is KPI
key
stand for?
performance indicators, they're things that can actually be measured quantitatively. Everything else AI struggles with. And if you can do one thing and nothing else, which is contextualize anything, you are already miles ahead of the AI. AI struggles with contextualizing anything. And your ability to do that, you can have the tools sort of supplement, but it cannot replace that functionality that's endemic to humanity. So looking at things that are outside of KPI, if it's some kind of little metric that your company is just measuring in abstract, you can let the model do that. If it's something that is not that, but it creates the value still, that's where you shine. So your secret sauce, no matter what your major is, that's what you're looking at. There's, as David said, you can't escape the agents. They've been there since all of you were born. But it's just a mind shift from it's going to replace who I am or what I do. And I can just give you story after story of companies that replaced a bunch of workers with AI and then had to hire them right back. And so we're just not there. That kind of AI model is AGI. And like I mentioned, we're not at the general intelligence level. We're still at the narrow intelligence. You are the general intelligence. So you have to bring that in.
Kathy?
All of the points I was going to make have been made by my brilliant colleagues. So I will give time for I think probably one more question.
Excellent. Dr. Nance?
You want me
Yeah.
to take the last question?
What's that?
Did you want me to take the last question?
Yeah,
or
you
you're
can
good?
take the last question.
So what should we, say ordinary people, do? What should those who are working in the tech industry, plan to work in the tech industry, or people who use AI, people who don't use AI, what should we all be doing to make all of this better?
You want that in like 3 minutes?
We started late.
Good.
It's like
5 minutes.
score and 444 seconds ago. I think start the conversations. I think that's part of it. I think, classmate to classmate, friend to friend, colleague to colleague, start the conversation, because right now there are a lot of assumptions being made that things are okay or things are horrible. And there's not a lot of collective, informed conversation going on within the groups so that we have this discourse. We are making assumptions that, well, either this is so far removed from my specialty and I will never understand what any of this means. And it's sort of like when you talk to a physician and they say, oh, Jessica, you have such an accumulation of uric acid around your patella. What's going on? Well, your heart rate just went up 15 and you're nervous. Where if I just came in and said, oh my goodness, why is your gout so flared up? Well, that's a whole different conversation. So we think that we don't know the language, and part of that is intentional. It's hard to interrogate what you don't understand, or what you can't even begin to spell so that you can even look it up. But there are a lot of us who do know the language and who are happy to break that down and want you in that conversation. And we need to just be very intentional about having it, just like we do with every other thing that comes along. So I think that's where we start. We have to start talking to each other, not on social media, not on text, but actually have the face-to-face so you can read things. Like, you can see body language, you can see intent, you can start to build that human connection. We can't just keep offloading everything to a digital medium. We are in an institution where we have that face-to-face capability, and so we need to start leveraging that. And we can have those conversations in philosophy, in psychology, in sociology, in chemistry, in biology, and all the other places, and then come together as a collective community and say, here's what we're thinking of, and then the researchers come in, and here's what's possible. And if they say it's not possible, bring in some more researchers, and just keep having that conversation.
I guess I'd give two pieces of guidance. The first is make intentional choices. So if you're going to have an Amazon Echo with Alexa in your house, make sure you know why you're doing it, and think about what you're going to use it for, and have an awareness of what it's recording and what it's not. If you're going to be on social media, like Kathy, I am not, but that's an intentional choice. And I am privileged enough to be able to not be on it. I don't need it for promoting myself for my professional goals. I recognize some people need to be on social media, and some people want to be. That's great, but know why you're on it. I think a lot of the technology we use, including AI, we use out of habit or out of convenience without thinking about the cost of it. And as the saying goes, if you're not having to pay for it with money, you're paying for it with your data. And so recognizing that when we're using systems that seem free, we're actually paying for it in other ways, and making really intentional decisions about whether we're willing to make those kinds of payments. Because if enough people go, no, I'm not willing to do that, companies will adapt. Those little individual decisions that we all make individually might not matter, but collectively they do. That's how markets work, is any individual purchasing decision doesn't really matter. It's the collective decisions that occur. And so being intentional in that way. And then related to that is being informed about how hard or not it is when you're thinking about trying to use technology in ways that benefit you. So as a really simple example, how many people have the experience of going to a website and it asks you to click whether you want to accept the cookies? We all know this, right? Thank you, GDPR. What you may not know is to have it essentially reject all cookies requires 2 clicks. You're going to do 1 click anyway. You might as well do that second one and deny that website all of the advertising and tracking and all those other cookies that are the really bad surveillance stuff. You can get rid of all of them. You can tell it, no, do not do any of that, by just doing 1 extra click. And I bet most of you probably didn't know that, because it's not in most companies' interest for you to be aware of how easy it is to do that. But all you do is you say, customize, confirm. because the default is required to be, if you say you want to customize, the default has to be that it gets rid of everything except the bare minimum. So with one extra click, you can actually cut down on the amount of surveillance that happens to you in online spaces in a very significant way. And so this kind of learning, I think, goes a long way for people to start to feel like they can reclaim some of what's going on around them. And of course, at every opportunity you have, lobby your congresspeople, your local state senators, get involved in your local politics or your organizations. I'm sure here at UMBC there are security cameras. Find out what the privacy rules are around that. Find out if they can use the video feeds from the security cameras on this campus. Can they build AI systems on them? Are they building AI systems? I have no idea. But I bet you could find out, because I know I can find out at UCSD. I made sure to find out that no, we're not building AI systems with it, because there are universities where they are. Right? So if you're here at UMBC, this is a place you could shape things, right? Find the organizations where you can make a difference and take an active role, because history is often made by those who show up, and just showing up and saying, I don't think this is okay, often can go a long way.
All right. Kathy, do you want the last word?
What he said.
All right. Well, if you would join me in thanking our speakers. This is a wonderful event.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time.